Flight 482 from Dallas to Chicago was crowded, the hum of the engines mixing with the chatter of anxious passengers. Carter moved down the aisle with practiced precision, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the cabin for signs of trouble. She had worked as a flight attendant for nearly a decade, learning to anticipate the chaos that came with every overbooked flight, every restless child, every nervous first-time flyer. Today, the air felt thicker than usual, heavy with impatience and restless energy, as if the cabin itself had caught a fever. A boy no older than 7 squirmed in his seat. His little feet thumped against the seat in front of him repeatedly. Eyes narrowed. She had been patient countless times, gently asking children to behave, soothing anxious parents, diffusing conflicts between strangers. But this constant kicking pushed her beyond her usual calm. She knelt briefly beside him, speaking in a soft but firm voice. "Please stop. Your feet hurt the seat in front." The child's eyes darted at her, a spark of defiance igniting behind the innocence. He kicked again, harder this time. His patience snapped. Her hand shot out instinctively, slapping his small hand. The sound echoed in the aisle like a gunshot. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. The mother's face paled. Passengers turned their heads, some shocked, some disapproving. Froze, feeling a jolt of guilt, but also a strange surge of justified anger. Years of managing screaming children, demanding passengers, and the occasional drunk traveler had trained her for precision and diplomacy. But not for moments like this, where instinct overrode reason. The boy whimpered, retreating into himself, while the mother struggled to find words, her eyes flashing between fear and indignation. I'm sorry," said, her voice strained. She wanted to explain, to justify herself, but no words could make the slap disappear. The cabin, usually humming with quiet activity once passengers settled in, now felt tense, almost electrically charged. She could feel eyes on her, scanning, judging, whispering, as though the small act of discipline had upset some delicate balance in the air. Step back, her chest heaving, glancing toward the cockpit. Captain Aaron, a veteran pilot whose calm authority was legendary, was visible in the small cockpit mirror. His eyes met hers for a brief second and felt a shiver run down her spine. He wasn't angry, not yet, but his gaze carried weight, the kind of unspoken scrutiny that could pierce through bravado and defensiveness. She had seen captains glare before, but this was different. His eyes were measured, calm, yet filled with an understanding that unsettled her. Around her, the cabin remained quiet but tense. The boy's breathing quickened and crouched slightly, observing him. She hated that she had let her temper show, but part of her recognized that instinct had saved the day before the situation escalated further. She adjusted her posture, straightening shoulders, taking a deep breath to regain composure. Flight attendants prided themselves on grace under pressure, but moments like this tested that skill to its limits. His mind raced, thinking through the dozens of scenarios she had trained for, calming angry passengers, redirecting misbehaving children, preventing conflicts before they erupted. Yet none of that preparation had included the sting of immediate judgment from the people she was meant to serve. As she continued down the aisle, checking seat belts and making sure carry-ons were stowed, she felt every eye on her. Some passengers watched in sympathy, others in subtle disdain. A few rows ahead, a man whispered to his companion, "Did she just slap that kid?" The words were soft but carried, and ears pricked at the tone. She felt a flash of embarrassment, her face warming. She had always maintained professionalism, until now. But beneath the embarrassment was another feeling, harder to name, pride of sorts, for acting decisively in a moment of frustration that could have escalated worse. Her instincts had guided her, raw and imperfect, and now the aftermath of judgment rippled through the cabin. At that moment, sensed a presence from the cockpit. Captain's voice came softly over the intercom, calm but commanding. "The cockpit, please." The cabin murmured as passengers glanced toward the front. His heart pounded. She rose from the aisle, adjusting her uniform, steadying herself. Whatever awaited her in the cockpit, she knew one thing. Today's flight was far from ordinary, and her instincts and her reputation were about to be tested like never before. Carter's heart raced as she approached the cockpit. Her shoes clicked softly against the aisle, but in her mind the sound was thunderous. The passengers' murmurs followed her, their curiosity thick in the recycled cabin air. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, adjusting her uniform, straightening her hair, praying that whatever awaited her wouldn't undo years of professionalism. Captain Aaron, seated with his hands folded over the yoke, didn't look up immediately. Instead, he let her enter, then slowly raised his gaze, his eyes calm but unyielding. He said, his voice low but deliberate, carrying the weight of authority, "Sit." She obeyed instinctively, perching on the small jump seat at the side of the cockpit. Her hands gripped her knees, didn't scold her. He didn't reprimand her for the slap. Instead, he studied her, letting silence fill the space between them. It was a silence that held judgment and understanding simultaneously, a rare combination that unsettled her, felt exposed yet oddly relieved. The storm of emotions from the cabin, the shock, the murmurs, the boy's mother's glare, had followed her here. Now she had to face it. Finally leaned back slightly, a subtle smile tugging at his lips. "Falcon," he said, just that single word, and the name struck her like lightning, reverberating in her chest. "Falcon," she echoed, disbelief in her tone. Her mind raced, trying to process what he meant. It wasn't a reprimand, it wasn't a joke. It carried weight, history, and expectation all at once. "Falcon," repeated, his voice steady, "because that's what you are. Observant, fast, protective. You act instinctively, decisively." "That slap," he gestured vaguely toward the cabin, "was your instincts protecting your territory. But instincts alone can be raw and destructive if not refined." Blinked. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this. Never had anyone recognized the calculated precision behind her frustration, the skill buried beneath the impulse. Most supervisors criticized mistakes, highlighted failures, and expected obedience. Words were different. They were validation, recognition of something she hadn't realized existed within her. Her chest tightened, a mix of pride and apprehension. She had been a flight attendant for almost 10 years, yet never had anyone seen her like this, as more than a rule follower or service worker, but as someone with instincts worth nomming and hunting. He leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a confidential tone. "Falcon sees the entire cabin at once. Falcon notices tension before it escalates. Falcon acts before panic spreads." His eyes scanned hers, locking her attention. "That boy, the mother, the passengers, are all your responsibility. Not with fear, not with anger, but with precision. You can control the situation without losing yourself." Felt a jolt of understanding. He wasn't lecturing, he was mentoring. In one brief moment, he had shifted her perception of the role she thought she knew. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was a protector, a guardian, a force to be reckoned with, calm, precise, vigilant. His hand rested lightly on the yoke. "I've seen crew members crack under far less. But you," he said, voice steady, "you have the raw potential to be more than most ever become. Your instincts are sharp, but now they need refinement. Observation, patience, timing. These will turn a moment of frustration into decisive, controlled authority. You can be the falcon of the cabin, guiding, protecting, without raising your hand unnecessarily." Felt heat rush to her face. She had never been praised for skill or instinct, only criticized for mistakes. Yet here in the quiet cockpit she felt a flicker of pride ignite, tempered with a burning determination. Falcon. The word resonated in her mind, echoing like a call to arms. She straightened her back, eyes focused, adrenaline mingling with clarity. This wasn't just a lesson in authority, it was a moment of transformation. She felt the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders, heavy but purposeful. As she rose to return to the cabin's voice followed her softly over her shoulder. "Remember, Falcon, control the chaos, protect those in your care, and let your instincts guide you, not anger." Steps were steadier this time. Her heart still raced, but now with anticipation, not panic. The aisle ahead, once a corridor of tension, seemed less threatening. She had a new identity, a new purpose. Falcon. Carter returned to the cabin, her heart still racing from the cockpit encounter. Captain's words, Falcon, echoed in her mind like a mantra. She adjusted her uniform, smoothed her hair, and stepped down the aisle with a deliberate calm she had never fully mastered before. Passengers glanced her way, some curious, some wary, others still murmuring about the slap earlier. She ignored their stares. Today wasn't about their judgment. It was about her own control, her ability to transform instinct into precise action. The restless boy sat slumped, toy bear clutched to his chest, tears streaking his face. His mother's shoulders were tense, eyes darting between her son and uncertain whether to scold or forgive. Knelt beside the boy, maintaining eye contact, her voice softer than it had been in the cockpit. "Hey, I want to see your bear," she said. "What's its name?" The boy blinked, surprise flickering across his tear-stained face. Hesitant, he whispered, "Benny." A small smile cracked lips. Observation, she reminded herself. Watch, listen, understand. Not punish, not dominate. The boy's attention began to shift and subtly guided him through small tasks, stacking magazines, holding the tray table, straightening his backpack. Each action was a test of his cooperation and her own patience. She could see the relief in his mother's posture, the tension ebbing from the passengers around them. One elderly woman nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement of the shift in atmosphere. His movements were precise, not abrupt, not forceful, but deliberate and controlled. Every glance, every gesture was intentional. As she moved down the aisle, she noticed subtle tensions between passengers, an argument about seat space, a mother struggling with a squirming toddler. Observed quietly, nodding tone, posture, and body language. She intervened only when necessary, her voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, your tray is fine there, thank you," she said softly. The disagreement ended without further escalation. Another child, frightened by the engine noise, began to cry. Knelt again, gently patting the child's back while speaking in a steady rhythm. Passengers around them relaxed. The cabin, once tense and jittery, had begun to breathe. She glanced toward the cockpit mirror. Captain's eyes met hers briefly, a hint of approval in his gaze. It wasn't just about enforcing rules, she realized. It was about creating a safe, controlled environment where instincts were sharpened, not suppressed. The word Falcon wasn't a nickname. It was a philosophy. She had to anticipate trouble, observe every detail, and act decisively, but with precision, patience, and empathy. Minutes passed, the plane now cruising smoothly. Maintained her vigilance, her attention split between passengers, children, and cabin crew. She noted subtle cues, a man tapping nervously on his phone, a mother whispering to her child, the way the boy next to her now sat upright, eyes curious, not defiant. Each observation allowed her to predict reactions before they escalated, to intervene subtly, guiding the flow without confrontation. The cabin had transformed from chaos to quiet order, and for the first time, felt an unfamiliar surge of pride. Her colleagues began noticing. One young flight attendant whispered, "How are you so calm?" Didn't answer immediately, choosing instead to study, adjust, and guide. Observation, patience, timing, these were her new tools. She realized her instincts were no longer raw impulses. They were precise, deliberate actions that created harmony amid turbulence. Falcon was more than a title. It was a discipline she was just beginning to master. As the boy leaned over to show her Benny the bear, smiled genuinely. No words of reprimand were needed. Control didn't require force. It required understanding, observation, and calculated guidance. The shift in atmosphere was palpable. Passengers were calmer, children more cooperative, and even the murmurs of judgment faded into silence. She had acted instinctively before, but now, under mentorship, she acted deliberately. The Falcon was learning to soar. Stood, straightened her uniform, and scanned the cabin. Each passenger, each child, each member of her crew was a detail to notice, a pattern to understand. The flight was far from over, but already she felt the shift within herself. Falcon wasn't just a name whispered in the cockpit. It was her identity. Observation, precision, control, and protection. The tools that would guide her through the rest of this flight and every flight to come. The plane had reached cruising altitude, the hum of engines steady, the passengers settling into the rhythm of the flight. Carter moved quietly through the cabin, clipboard tucked under her arm, eyes scanning for small signs of unrest. The boy with the toy bear now sat upright, fingers clutching the soft fabric as if it were a lifeline. His mother relaxed slightly, glancing with cautious approval. The cabin felt calmer than it had when the flight began, but knew better than to let her guard down. Instinct had taught her chaos could erupt in an instant. Then it hit. A sudden jolt threw trays and overhead bins shifted, rattling with a sharp clang. Passengers gasped and gripped armrests, eyes wide with fear. The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies, and we've hit unexpected turbulence. Please remain seated and fasten your—" A few screams pierced the hum of concern. A toddler cried, a young woman clutched her partner's arm, her knuckles white. Heart raced, but this time adrenaline mixed with clarity, not panic. She was the Falcon now, observant, precise, protective. She stepped briskly into the aisle, her eyes scanning every face, every gesture. A mother clutched her infant tightly, rocking back and forth, whispering reassurances that wavered under the turbulence. The same boy with the toy bear began to whimper again, uncertainty flooding his features. Knelt beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she said calmly. "I'm right here. We'll ride it out together." Her tone was firm, soothing, measured. Slowly, his tears subsided, replaced by wide eyes taking in her steady presence. Around her, passengers looked toward instinctively. Crew members followed her lead, sensing the change in authority. Each motion she made was precise, securing a rolling water bottle, stabilizing a loose bag, guiding a flustered passenger back to their seat. His voice cut through the panic without raising, without scolding, only directing. She observed the room like a predator in the sky, predicting reactions before they occurred, acting before chaos could spread. She realized words weren't exaggeration. She truly was the Falcon of the cabin. The turbulence worsened. The plane tilted, a loud rumble echoing through the fuselage. Passengers gripped their seats, some muttering prayers, others white-knuckling tray tables. His hand remained on the boy's shoulder. "Take a deep breath," she instructed, mirroring the steady rhythm of her own breathing. The mother of the infant nearby glanced at her, eyes wide with gratitude. The tension in the cabin began to ease, small gestures of reassurance rippling outward. One by one, the passengers followed calm example, their panic slowly replaced with trust. Moved down the aisle, checking straps, smoothing anxious passengers concerned, nodding to her colleagues to follow protocol without rushing. She noticed subtle signs, a man's clammy hands, a woman holding her husband too tightly, a teen biting nails. She addressed each quietly, guiding them with the gentlest words. Observation, precision, timing. This was her transformation in action. She wasn't just reacting, she was orchestrating calm, controlling chaos without force. The boy now smiled faintly, showing Benny the bear, pointing to her with trust in his eyes. Minutes dragged, yet maintained her vigilance, sensing that turbulence would continue. A few passengers whispered to each other, clearly impressed, commenting on her steady demeanor. Flight attendants exchanged glances, some admiration, some disbelief. His chest swelled with a quiet pride. This was mastery in motion, Falcon's wings extending across the cabin, every action deliberate, protective, and effective. She understood now the depth of his insight. It wasn't enough to survive the turbulence. She had to command it, guide it, and protect everyone beneath her watchful eyes. Finally, the plane leveled, the sudden jerks fading into a low hum. Passengers exhaled, some laughing nervously, others relieved, tears sliding down cheeks. Allowed herself a small, private smile. The cabin was calm, secure, and intact. Her colleagues gave her subtle nods of acknowledgement. Falcon had flown her first real test. She stood, checking her reflection in the cockpit mirror, seeing not just a flight attendant but a guardian, precise and vigilant. The flight was far from over, but now knew she could face any storm. The plane touched down smoothly at Chicago, our tires kissing the tarmac with a faint screech. Carter exhaled quietly, though her heart still thumped with the adrenaline that had carried her through the turbulence. The passengers were shifting, gathering belongings, whispering soft compliments and thank yous under their breaths. Some eyes followed her as she moved down the aisle, clipboard in hand, guiding luggage, smoothing, and ensuring the cabin returned to order. For once, the murmurs were not of judgment, but respect, an acknowledgement that her presence had kept the chaos at bay. Captain Aaron remained in his seat, observing with a quiet smile. Approached the cockpit briefly, her nerves still raw from the flight. "Falcon," he said softly, his gaze steady and approving. "You handled that perfectly. Not a hand raised unnecessarily, not a voice lost. Calm, precise, protective. That's what leadership looks like in the cabin." Blinked, stunned by the validation. She had spent years maintaining professionalism, rarely praised beyond polite acknowledgement. This felt different, personal, earned, transformative. His words resonated deep within her, sparking a warmth of pride she hadn't realized she had been missing. The boy from earlier clutched his mother's hand, peeking over at with a shy smile. "Thank you," his mother whispered, tears glimmering in her eyes. I don't know how you did it, but he's calm now," crouched briefly, offering a reassuring nod and a small smile. Observation, precision, empathy, these weren't just words from anymore. They were tools she had wielded with care. Watching the boy's mother relax, witnessing passengers uncoil their tension, felt a quiet thrill. Falcon wasn't a name. It was a role she had embodied and mastered, if only for this moment. Her colleagues looked on with newfound respect. A young attendant approached hesitantly. "That was amazing," she said softly. "How did you stay so calm?" His lips curved in a brief, knowing smile. "You observe, you notice. You anticipate, you act, but only when necessary," she said quietly. "Chaos isn't controlled by force, it's controlled by understanding it before it consumes everything." She moved down the aisle, checking seat belts and guiding passengers off the plane with the same steady authority that had carried her through the turbulence. Even the passengers were subtly acknowledging her mastery. Whispers of admiration circulated. "She handled that perfectly. I've never seen anyone so calm. The lady with the bear, the one who helped the kids, she's incredible." Allowed herself a small, private smile. It wasn't about recognition, she reminded herself. It was about protecting, guiding, and maintaining calm under pressure. Yet the recognition brought a warmth that she had never anticipated. Captain stepped toward her as she secured the last tray table. "Falcon," he said again, a touch of pride in his voice. "That turbulence wasn't easy. You didn't just survive it, you led. You turned instinct into control, observation into guidance, chaos into calm. You've transformed the cabin into something safe and predictable, not through authority alone, but through skill." Felt a flush of validation, mixed with awe. The nickname had become an identity she was only beginning to understand. She had embodied the Falcon. As passengers began disembarking, guided them with quiet efficiency, all the while observing details others overlooked. A child dropping a toy, a purse slipping from a seat, a nervous passenger unsure of how to exit. She intervened gently, precisely, and without drama. Each action reinforced her newfound role. Falcon wasn't about intimidation. It was vigilance, clarity, and protective authority. She felt an unfamiliar satisfaction in her work, a pride deeper than any praise, knowing that she had earned it through calm mastery and deliberate action. By the time the last passenger left, colleagues gathered briefly around her, nodding, offering smiles of admiration and gratitude. The boy waved as he passed, Benny clutched firmly. Waved back, a small smile playing on her lips. Falcon had soared today. She finally understood what had seen, the sharp, observant, decisive presence that she could become. And she knew, as she straightened her uniform and glanced at the cockpit mirror, that this was only the beginning of her transformation. Weeks passed since Flight 482, but Captain's words, Falcon, echoed in Carter's mind with constant clarity. Each flight she boarded now felt different. She moved with a quiet authority, attentive to every detail, every passenger, and every creak of the aircraft. Her colleagues began to notice subtle changes. Where once had relied on strict rules and reactive instincts, she now anticipated, observed, and intervened with precision. Her movements were no longer hurried or harsh. They were deliberate, calculated, and controlled. She had become the Falcon, guardian of the cabin, eyes sharp and mind clear. On a mid-morning flight from Atlanta to New York, turbulence struck without warning. Panic flared as passengers gripped armrests and whispered anxiously. moved down the aisle like a shadow, observing gestures, body language, and tone. A woman clutched a sleeping baby, lips quivering. A teenager fiddled with an overhead bin, unaware of the tray table beneath. Intervened smoothly, guiding hands, calming nerves, positioning. No raised voices, no panic, just a subtle command in her gaze and tone that passengers followed instinctively. The cabin, once chaotic, became orderly, cooperative, calm. Her colleagues watched, impressed. A new flight attendant whispered in awe, "How do you stay so composed?" Glanced briefly, her lips curving into a soft smile. "Observation, patience, and timing," she said. "You don't act first, you watch, learn, and then guide." She realized that the slap from weeks ago had been a crude instinct. Now precision replaced impulse. Falcon wasn't about anger or dominance. It was calculated awareness, protection, and subtle leadership. Her actions were deliberate, almost invisible, yet powerful. During the turbulence, notice subtle patterns. A nervous man tapping his phone rapidly, a woman holding her partner too tightly, a child gripping a stuffed animal for comfort. Each sign informed her next move. She guided, redirected, reassured, and corrected without drama. Every motion was intentional, measured. She moved the cabin like a conductor directing an orchestra, each passenger, each crew member, a note in harmony. Her instinct, once raw, had evolved into mastery. The Falcon didn't just see. She predicted, protected, and led. After the plane leveled, took a quiet moment to check on every passenger she had assisted. The mother with the infant smiled in gratitude, the teenager nodded with a newfound respect, and the nervous man relaxed in his seat. Even those unaware of her interventions felt the calm radiating through the cabin. Colleagues exchanged glances, some awe, some disbelief, all understanding that her presence had prevented escalation and fostered trust. Falcon had become more than a name. It had become a method, a philosophy, and a reputation. In the weeks that followed, began mentoring her colleagues. She shared small techniques, subtle observations, and methods to anticipate chaos without confrontation. New attendants marveled at her ability to diffuse tense situations quietly and efficiently. She taught them to see the cabin as an ecosystem, each passenger a signal, each child a pattern to interpret. Falcon's lessons weren't loud or obvious. They were powerful because they relied on awareness, control, and empathy. Took pride in seeing her colleagues adapt, realizing she had transformed her experience into guidance. By the end of the month, passenger reviews reflected her growing mastery. Notes praised the flight attendant who handled everything calmly, the woman who seemed to anticipate problems before they happened, and the guardian of the cabin. Smiled privately, understanding that her work had evolved from reactive service to proactive protection. Falcon was not just a nickname, it was her identity, her skill, her craft. She now understood the difference between reacting with frustration and leading with precision. As she prepared for another flight, clipboard in hand, thoughts drifted briefly to Captain's words. Observation, patience, timing. Protect, guide, anticipate. The Falcon was in full flight now, steady, vigilant, and fearless. Today, passengers would feel calm, crew would feel guided, and would feel in control. Each flight became a test, a demonstration, a chance to practice mastery. The cabin was her domain, and Falcon's eyes were everywhere. Carter had flown countless flights, but nothing prepared her for the storm brewing over the Midwest. Flight 710, en route from Denver to Seattle, was deceptively smooth at first. Passengers chatted softly, children played quietly with tablets, and the cabin hummed with the gentle rhythm of flight. Moved through the aisles with her usual precision, clipboard tucked under her arm, observing subtle gestures. A mother wringing her hands, a man nervously tapping his phone, a teenager shifting uneasily in her seat. Every detail mattered and noted them all, the Falcon's eyes always alert. Suddenly the plane shuddered violently. The smooth hum became a roar of metal and engine, and oxygen masks dropped from overhead compartments with a terrifying precision. A warning chime sounded from the cockpit, and panic erupted like a wildfire. Passengers screamed, children cried, and luggage shifted violently from overhead bins. Heart raced, but unlike before, panic didn't cloud her mind. She inhaled deeply, centering herself. Falcon instincts kicked in: observe, anticipate, act. Every motion, every word needed to be precise. She moved down the aisle like a shadow, calm amid chaos, a steady anchor in a sea of fear. A passenger fainted mid-aisle, a man grabbed his arm, and two others tried to unbuckle themselves despite the turbulence. His hand steadied the fainting man, guiding him back to his seat while directing the others firmly but gently. "Sit. Stay calm. Follow me." Her voice carried authority without panic, and gradually the chaos slowed. Passengers instinctively obeyed, drawn by her calm presence. She knelt beside a terrified child, whispering soft reassurances, mirroring her steady breathing to help regulate theirs. The cabin began to respond to her control, each gesture subtle yet deliberate, every action reinforcing order. Captain's words echoed in her mind. Falcon sees everything, anticipates, protects. She scanned the aisles, predicting reactions before they erupted. A mother was panicking over her crying infant, placed a steady hand on her arm. "I've got your baby. Focus on your breathing. We'll get through this." The woman's grip on the infant loosened slightly, panic ebbing under precise guidance. Another child clung to his, trembling. Knelt, offering a toy and soft words of distraction. Observation, patience, timing. The Falcon's tools were now instincts, fully honed under pressure. Minutes stretched into eternity. Lightning flashed outside the windows, illuminating the tense faces of passengers, while thunder rattled the fuselage. But the cabin, under steady control, held a fragile order. Crew members followed her lead, anticipating her movements, assisting with tasks without hesitation. Passengers were not fully calm, but they trusted her. Every small intervention, securing a rolling backpack, guiding a frightened passenger to their seat, whispering reassurance to a child, was precise, protective, and intentional. When the turbulence finally eased, the plane leveled and oxygen masks retracted, allowed herself a small exhale. Around her, the passengers' panic dissolved into shaky relief. Some clapped softly, others whispered words of thanks. Even her colleagues looked at her in awe, recognizing the mastery she had displayed. Straightened her uniform, adjusting her posture, her heart still racing but tempered with satisfaction. Falcon had not just survived, she had led. Captain's voice crackled over the intercom as they returned to cruising altitude. "Excellent work, Falcon. The way you handled that calm, precise, protective was remarkable." Chest swelled with pride, yet she remained grounded. This was mastery, yes, but also responsibility. Falcon was not a title, nor a nickname, it was a calling. She had learned to transform instinct into deliberate action, chaos into order, fear into trust. The passengers were safe, the crew confident, and had earned her wings. As the plane cruised onward, moved through the cabin one last time, ensuring everyone was secure. Her eyes scanned each passenger, noting small details. Trembling hands soothed infants, relieved smiles. The storm outside had tested her, pushed her limits, and she had not faltered. She allowed herself a rare smile. Falcon had flown through the storm and emerged stronger, sharper, unshakable, a true guardian of the skis. Months had passed since the turbulence over the Midwest, but the lessons of Flight 710 stayed etched in Carter's mind. She moved through airports, through gates, through new flights, with the quiet authority of someone who had seen the edge of chaos and mastered it. Falcon was no longer just a nickname whispered by Captain. It had become her identity, a philosophy, a discipline she carried into every cabin. Observation, precision, empathy, timing. These weren't just words. They were actions, instincts refined into a powerful, protective presence. On a chilly morning, boarded Flight 832 from San Francisco to Dallas. The plane was busy, families crowded with carry-ons, business travelers typing on laptops, children fidgeting in their seats. She stepped down the aisle, clipboard tucked under her arm, scanning the cabin with her Falcon eyes. Every twitch of a hand, every nervous glance, every sigh told a story. She noted the boy holding his mother's hand tightly, the elderly woman shifting uneasily in her seat, the teenage girl staring nervously at the overhead bin. Awareness was her first weapon, patience her second. The flight began smoothly, engines humming, passengers settling into the rhythm of travel, moved like a silent guardian, a shadow threading through the rows. She observed, she anticipated, she acted only when necessary. A toddler fidgeted in the back, trying to climb over the armrest. Knelt beside him, soft voice guiding, hands gentle but firm. "Easy there. Let's stay safe in your seat, okay?" The boy's cries faded under her calm, deliberate presence. Around her, passengers instinctively mirrored her steadiness. The cabin's pulse had shifted. Falcon was in control. Midway through the flight, a sudden jolt of turbulence rocked the plane. Instincts flared. Panic rose around her. A mother clutched her infant tightly, a business traveler gripped the armrest, a child whimpered softly. Moved immediately, positioning herself between the panicked mother and the baby, whispering calm instructions while securing the infant in her arms. She guided passengers gently, firmly, and precisely. Every motion was intentional, every word measured. Crew members followed her lead without hesitation. She wasn't acting on instinct alone, she was executing calculated protection, honed over countless flights, under countless crises. The turbulence lasted only a few minutes, but it tested every skill had cultivated. By the time the plane leveled, the cabin had returned to order. Passengers exhaled, some whispering thanks, some glancing at her in awe. The boy she had calmed earlier waved shyly, clutching his toy. Smiled briefly, letting her presence convey reassurance. Falcon had not just survived another storm, she had maintained control, guided her crew, and ensured the safety and calm of every passenger. As the plane began its descent into Dallas, moved through the cabin, checking seat belts, adjusting carry-ons, and offering quiet guidance. Her colleagues looked on, a mix of admiration and quiet inspiration in their eyes. They had seen her transform from a sharp but reactive flight attendant into something more, a leader, a guardian, a falcon. She embodied observation, empathy, and authority seamlessly, without raising her voice, without demanding attention. Her presence alone commanded trust. After the passengers disembarked, lingered briefly, observing the cabin one last time. The chaos, the fear, the small tensions, they were all gone. In their place was calm, order, and trust. Captain appeared at the front of the plane, offering a rare, proud smile. "Falcon," he said simply. No explanation was needed. Eyes met his. She nodded, feeling the weight of the nickname settle into her bones, not as a title but as truth. She had earned it. She was the Falcon. Later, as walked through the terminal, colleagues approaching to ask for guidance, passengers passing her with grateful smiles, she felt the culmination of her journey. Falcon wasn't a person, it was a presence. It was clarity under chaos, protection under stress, vigilance under pressure. Carter had become more than a flight attendant. She was a guardian of the skis, precise, calm, fearless, and fully in command. The skis weren't just her workplace anymore, they were her domain. And the Falcon would always watch, steady and unwavering.